moment's come. This is a huge honor for me to welcome our speaker today. As soon as we saw the theme vibrant, we wanted to focus it on the city and the vibrancy that's contained within this city and the amazing things that we see. And the first person that came to mind, and a person that's doing incredible community work, is Rachel Weldon. Give it up for Rachel. Rachel is the mind behind Debaser, Peak, community-oriented, does it all, leads with the heart, leads with intention. If you haven't experienced one of her events or workshops, highly recommend it. So this is a huge honor for me, somebody that I admire incredibly. Please welcome to the stage, Rachel Weldon.
I'll give you a hug after that. Thank you. Wow, that's a really, really sweet introduction. I'm really moved also by seeing the whole Creative Mornings team come together and hearing about your ethos and how you do your work is really inspiring. And it's such an honor to share the stage with Chris today. I think I've known Chris for about 10 years. We've been working together. And I love his music, and I've had the pleasure of working with him for quite a while. But what I love about Chris as well is he's such a yes and artist. When we invited him to do Peak next week, he was like, yes, and I'd love to work with this other amazing artist, and we're going to do something multidisciplinary and collaborative and conceptual, and it's going to knock your socks off. What do you think? And we're like, yeah, thank you, Chris, for always bringing such brilliant ideas our way. And as you saw, his brilliant paintings also, I don't know if he thinks of himself as a poet, but all of them have these like beautiful heart-rending titles that are themselves feel like mini poems. So follow him on Instagram and you'll see what I mean. Thank you again, Chris. Maybe one more round of applause for that. Okay, the first thing on my notes is deep breath, so I'm gonna do that if you wanna join me. Hey, I'm Rachel. Thanks for having me today. I'm the director and founder of Debaser. This is me. A nonprofit organization and a Peak Festival, which is coming up next week. At Peak and Debaser, we're dedicated to supporting underground, underrepresented, and equity-deserving artists. In 2013, I founded Debaser. At the time, it was the name of my radio show on CKCU-FM. And I had that show just because I wanted to play music by artists that I really cared about and that weren't being played otherwise. So that's how we started, and the way we started organizing events, there was a band, some friends of mine from Toronto who made weird electronic music, who asked if I could help set up a show and if I could present it as the radio show, and I agreed. And so that was the first event that we did. And from the very beginning, we were very serving underrepresented artists that I really cared about. We were very care-oriented and very DIY. At the beginning, it was just me, but we grew to be a collective of people. Emily was the first person who joined me, who was really good with finances and volunteer management, so that's what she handled. And then Willow and Mac, two people who were in high school at the time, helped by working the door and setting up, like helping manage the stage. Willow still works with us, by the way. So we would do everything ourselves. We would book the show, work with the bands, book the venue, make the posters, print and distribute the posters, set up the equipment, work the door, work the lights, host the bands at our house after, cook them dinner, make them coffee in the morning. Everything from A to B, A to Z. And so that was us then. This is our first show ever in 2013. This is the band Doom Squad. This is one of our early shows in 2014 with Lido Pimienta and Melody McIver, both who have gone on to be international superstars. That was us then, an independent, underground, DIY, care-oriented event organizer. And this is us now, 11 years later, an independent, underground, DIY, care-oriented event organizer. We've come a long way in 11 years. We've grown a lot. We now are employed. I work with amazing people, Katie, Sandra, Miley, Nick. There's a whole bunch of people who make the events that we do possible. So I'm definitely not alone. But I'm also really proud at how 11 years later, we're really still are true to those things that we started, those like original core values and our approaches. Our programming has always been diverse. We've always prioritized equity-deserving artists and serving underrepresented communities. But that's also always been secondary to the art itself and the way that we approach curation. The artists that we're drawn to are doing something differently. They're thinking outside the box, doing something innovative and unexpected, may that be by contemporizing traditional practice or subverting an outdated norm. In various ways, they contribute to a cultural dialogue and they make a social impact. So artists who are bold and vibrant and authentic and maybe provocative, interesting, authentically themselves, and unapologetic about it. And I think we're all creative people here, and we know that when you're a creative person and you're sharing your art, it takes so much vulnerability to bare your soul, and it takes so much bravery. And especially for these artists that we work with who are doing something differently and thinking outside the box and subverting norms. It's especially vulnerable and especially brave what they're doing. And I think that those vulnerable, brave experiences, those moments, are what can create the most beautiful and vibrant artistic encounters. Because when an artist is vulnerable, they invite you into their worlds and they create connections with the audience. They help people understand complex experiences, complex worldviews. So when I think about the theme of Creative Mornings this month, vibrant, I think about these, like, at the core of it is vulnerability and bravery and being unapologetic and authentic and proud. When I think of beautiful performances, I think of Lido Pimienta, inviting brown and black women to the front of the stage where she can keep an eye on them and keep them out of harm's way, but also give them the best version of her show. And I think of Halal Bey proudly reclaiming her Palestinian heritage and lip-syncing to Palestinian music in full drag, wearing keffiyeh with facial hair. These are the artists, Halal Bey. These are the artists that we're drawn to, and the audience that's also drawn to them are such a beautiful, open-minded, open-hearted audience, and that's often the audiences that we get to work with at Debaser. The people who come out to our events are often very open-minded, adventurous, diverse, queer, not afraid to show their freaky side. And it's something that's really noticed by the artists that we work with and the people who come to our events, how comfortable and inclusive and welcoming and open-minded and diverse the audiences we gather are. Talked about what draws us to artists, but what draws them to us? What makes Debaser special, and why do we have the privilege of being able to work with all these wonderful artists? I think my answer for that is care. Care really is the approach that we take, and what I think makes us special and unique. And I think why it makes Debaser special to work in this way is because a lot of the world, unfortunately, doesn't operate according to a care-oriented approach. And I think especially events like the COVID-19 pandemic helped us realize that the world is in a crisis of care, where care is not being prioritized. And as a result, this sort of concept, this framework, began to arise called politics of care, which in opposition of like late-stage capitalism and neoliberalism, which treats care as a non-essential labor, a feminine labor, whose subjects are unuseful people. Politics of care is the idea and a framework of working that centers people's basic needs and their connections to one another. So rather than thinking about just yourself and your own interests, how can I look out for my community and make sure everybody is being taken care of? So like I said, this is not something really practiced, unfortunately, in the world at large, and I think that's what makes us unique. And it's also not something that's practiced a lot in the music industry. I think if there's any musicians here, you might have had these experiences, and even if you're not a musician, maybe you're aware of how difficult it can be to make a living as an artist on the low streaming royalties that they get. But in the live music industry, there's also a lot of problems, a lot of really low payments, gaps between what headliners make and what emerging artists make, artists who receive exposure pay or are paid in beer, drink tickets, venues and promoters who take large cuts of merchandise sales, and safety and well-being and rest and care just generally being not a consideration, not being a priority. And there's also the general idea, unfortunately, that artists, because they get to make art and share art for a living, deserve to be miserable. This is a musician from the band Dive who's talking about how backwards it is that musicians are expected to be miserable because they have the privilege of being musicians. Both of these last two slides, by the way, come from an organization called UMA, the United Musicians and Allied Workers, which is a union that started during the pandemic to fight for conditions of working artists. So if you are in the music industry or an allied worker, I encourage you to check them out. You can become a member and support their campaigns. I was also reading this interview between these three artists and a tour manager called The Soul-Sucking Reality of Touring that says a lot of really apt things, but talking about how backwards it is that even though it seems self-evident that people need music and art, and that's inherently valuable, how devalued it is, how devalued care is for artists, and how artists are treated so poorly when they're just showing up to share that art and share their work. So care is not a priority in the music industry in a lot of spaces. And knowing that how much vulnerability and how much bravery it takes to share your art, to get up on stage and to share a piece of yourself. Imagine being this vulnerable and brave when you're also tired and stressed and hungry and feeling invalidated and maybe fearful. Naturally, that would diminish an artist's light and their potential to connect and create those beautiful artistic encounters. So that's why I think that care is such an essential foundation to creating beautiful, vibrant cultural experiences. And I'm wondering, artists that we are, what care looks like to you. What basic needs do you need met so that you can show up and do your job and share your art and bare your soul? I don't know if anybody wants to share. Yeah.
Mental health support, for sure.
Mental health support, for sure. Anybody else? With respect, yeah.
I would think.
That part. Housing. Basic needs, like we're human beings.
More grants and easier to access them.
More financing?
Yeah.
Yeah, more financing, more grant. We're lucky in Canada with grants, but we all need to eat and pay for our expensive homes. For us at Debaser, care looks like a basic income, offering artists a livable wage that respects the amount of time they put into their presentation and the amount of people involved. It looks like covering your travel and hotel, your costs, picking you up from the train station or the airport, feeding you a meal, giving you access to a quiet, private space to relax before and after your show, giving you an adequate tech check, a sound check, a rehearsal, and inviting your creative input on how things should look and sound. Asking you what your access needs are, if you need a chair on stage, if you need time built into the schedule for rest, and providing harm reduction supplies like masks, naloxone, water, earplugs, even alcohol, cannabis can be harm reduction. But beyond also just meeting those basic needs that human beings need, care for us is also honoring who you are as an artist and as a person. It's asking what your pronouns are and making sure to respect them throughout your experience with us. My pronouns are she, her, they, them, by the way. And making sure our whole crew knows that. And for First Nations artists, we'll offer tobacco to say thanks for the performance as well. So care is meeting your basic needs as a human being with a body, but it's also honoring your art and your identity and what you're bringing. And I think that we obviously have a big responsibility to show care for artists when they are sharing so much vulnerability with us. But I think the audiences also have a big responsibility to show care to artists in this way. And ways that we can show care is simply listening and respecting artists when they're performing, not speaking through their performances, buying music and merch when you're streaming artists a lot in particular, or you really loved what they're offering on stage. And generally just doing away with the idea that artists deserve to be miserable because they get to share their art for a living. And I think when audiences show care in this way, and I think that we're really lucky to draw out audiences at Debaser events that do show a lot of care in this way, it becomes not just this one-way street of care from presenter to artist, but this like everybody's contributing. And together we're creating something that's vibrant and beautiful. We see this a lot at Peak, at our festival, these audiences, this sort of like care ecosystem, but we also see it a lot at Laylit events. I'm wondering if anybody here has been to Laylit? Yeah. So for those of you who haven't been, Laylit is a platform and collective celebrating music and artists from Arab and Swana regions in their diaspora. Swana means Southwest Asia, Northern African. So it's a party series, an event series that started between Montreal and New York City and has grown to do events in DC, Detroit, Toronto, and Ottawa. And it's an amazing showcase. When I think about like vibrant events, vibrant cultural experiences, Laylit really comes to mind. There's so much beauty and like pride in the room, pride in Arabic culture, pride in queer culture. And of all the audiences that we get to convene, I think Laylit's crowd is one of the most warm and friendly and inclusive and open-minded and friendly. Everyone's dancing together and vibing off of the music. It's such a beautiful event. I hope everybody has a chance to come. The next one will be in September, so a little while to wait. We show a lot of care for the artists involved with Laylit, like we do for all of the artists. And like I said, Ottawa is one of the smallest cities that they visit. And Club Saw, where they always come, is probably the smallest venue that they do parties at. So they don't really need to come here, in all honesty, but they tell us that they come back because they do receive so much care. They're so appreciative of how everything is taken care of, and it makes their job really easy. But also because the audience shows them so much love, and the community shows them so much love, and they can see how much it means to people here to come and to share with them. So when I think about this sort of ecosystem of care, Laylit really comes to mind because it really is everybody contributing to this like beautiful experience, this ecosystem. And speaking of ecosystems, I was reading this interview, thinking about this talk today, in Creative Independent, which is an amazing publication for creative people that interviews artists, by a sound artist and freshwater ecologist named Christina Gruber. And she has an interview called On Care and Listening as a Practice. And she's a scientist. She works to repopulate sturgeon populations in freshwater systems. And so she's talking about care for sturgeons, but she's talking about care as not this one-way relationship. So she says, you get trapped into thinking, I'm the one caring for you. And it's exactly the other way around. I think the term care is pretty poor and reciprocity is better because it implies mutual care at the same level. So that's, again, what I think is what's happening at these types of events. We're all showing care for each other, and there's this sort of cycle, this reciprocity of care that creates these beautiful artistic experiences and these beautiful encounters. She goes on, she's a sound artist, and she goes on to talk about her field recording practice, and she takes recordings of rivers by dipping microphones underwater, special microphones called hydrophones, and taking recordings of the river. And she talks about how it's a way of taking a piece of the river, listening to it without taking something away from it or invading it, doing something harmful to it. And I think she was speaking pretty technically, but I actually thought that this idea was really inspiring when we think about audiences and our role as listeners. Listening as sort of a non-extractivist way of approaching artists and receiving their gifts. Listening as sort of an anti-imperial, decolonial way of experiencing art. I think at Debaser events we facilitate a lot of music discovery, which is really cool. I think a lot of people come to our events not knowing the artists all the time and interested in just hearing something new and discovering something new. But sometimes with music discovery, unfortunately, I think there's a bit of an attitude of when people hear something new and it's really exciting, they kind of like to claim it and own it and make sure everyone knows that they were there first, which when you think about it is like a very colonial way to approach music and art. So I've been thinking about this lately, like how can we approach listening and presenting and being an audience member in a decolonial way? And when you have this sort of beautiful first encounter with an artist, something that's really meaningful, how can you resist claiming something from it and taking something away from it and just letting it be, not really invading it? I'm really glad that Marwan brought up Braiding Sweetgrass. It's an amazing book, and I'd love to go into both of these books. They're really important and influential books for me for a lot of reasons, but I just invite you to check them out for further reading. Hungry Listening by Dylan Robinson is a great book, especially if you're interested in music organizing or if you're an artist. Hungry Listening is sort of like a colonial approach to listening. I think he calls it the civilizing ear of the colonizer, and just how to resist that sort of settler colonial way of listening. And Braiding Sweetgrass, which among many other amazing things talks a lot about reciprocity and care, specifically for like the natural environment, but I think it has a lot of interesting implications for art as well. So how can we approach listening as a practice of care? How do we practice it with reciprocity? When being an audience member can kind of feel like a passive activity, a passive role. But listening is actually a very active practice. And I was preparing this talk today and thinking a lot about listening and care when this sort of situation came up at work this week, where we've been navigating a difficult situation where we've had to cancel an exhibition after announcing it because after announcing the content of it, the community came forward and said that for various reasons, it wasn't sitting right, it was feeling problematic, and it had the potential to cause harm. And that was really difficult to hear because, especially when your intentions are really to show care and to do something meaningful. I think we were working with a guest curator in this case, and I know that the curator intended to do something that was really meaningful and reflective of different intersectional communities and could be something that was beautiful. We also had to stop and listen when our community was saying that the impacts of this has the potential to cause harm. And like I said, that can be really difficult when your intentions are really good and like when you're a creative person and you're showing a lot of vulnerability and sharing things, it can be hard to receive criticism. But I think it's so important to remember, and I try to always remember in my work, that when people offer feedback like this, they're doing it in the community's interest. They're doing it as a community service. And they're doing it because they believe that you care enough to listen. And they believe that you have the potential to do right by them and do something better. So it's actually a generosity to offer feedback in this way. And it's a gift to be able to learn from it. So I feel a little self-conscious being up here talking about all the wonderful things that Debaser shows care to artists, and I do think that's true, but sometimes we misstep, and it can be really difficult, but it's also a real lesson in listening and care, and I'm still learning about this every day. I know I'm not really going into a lot of detail, but there's information on our Instagram and our website if you're curious, and I'm happy to speak to it after if you're interested in knowing more about our approach. Listening can feel like a really passive activity, but I think active listening is a really important approach. And Pauline Oliveros, artist who's very influential for me, who's influenced a lot of our work at Debaser, a composer and experimental musician, talks a lot about listening in her practice. She developed this sort of approach to music composition and meditation called deep listening. And for Pauline, listening is actually a form of activism. She said, listening is directing action to what is heard, gathering meaning, interpreting, and deciding on action. So listening as activism, to listen is to pay attention, and to pay attention is to be poised to act. So thinking of our role as audience members, even as an audience member, even when you're sort of a passive participant in this experience, it comes with a responsibility to show respect and to show care. And to not only show care in that moment for the artist who's performing for you and offering you their art, but also to carry that forward into the community and to do something impactful and positive with it. Even when you're at a great show, and even when you're experiencing something beautiful cultural experience, you can't ignore reality. You can't escape from reality, and you need to, remember your responsibilities all the time. The last event that we did with Laylit in 2023 was on October 7th, which was the day of the Hamas attacks. And that was a really horrible day for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, but I think especially for Palestinians and the Arabic community who gather at these events, it was a really, really hard day because they knew what was coming. But Layla did go ahead that night, and the artist said after how meaningful it was to have a safe space to gather, to process the tragedies, to share all the beautiful things about their culture that was so meaningful and made them feel good, and to blow off steam on the dance floor. There's this quote that maybe you've heard before by anarchist Emma Goldman: "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution," which really feels like it resonates with Laylit events. Laylit is a dance party at the end of the day, but at a time when there's so much anti-Palestinian fear and hate, it's also a very political space. And the artists who are there showing so much pride in their culture and creating these safe spaces are resisting in their own way. And it's incredibly vulnerable and incredibly brave, and that's what makes it so beautiful and so meaningful, I think, for so many community members. And I want to be careful in saying this because I don't want to equate throwing parties with other forms of really important resistance and protest right now. What's happening in Rafah this week is a horror that's unthinkable to a lot of us here in Canada. And we have such a privilege to be even able to be here and gathering and throwing events and being able to dance. I think that Laylit is a political space, and I think that listening is a form of activism, but as Canadians, we also have such a responsibility right now to keep demanding that our governments, keep putting pressure on our governments for a ceasefire, for an arms embargo, keep boycotting, using your political power and your purchasing power to boycott the corporations that are funding this genocide. At the same time, though, I think that we need to show care for ourselves so that we have the capacity to show care for others and to do this work because it's difficult work. And so I do think that taking time to gather like we're here today and to go to events and to participate in these beautiful experiences is also important in its own way. Because events like Laylit can be very moralizing and galvanizing way to show care for your community and to take that care out into the community and to engage in political action ongoingly. And unfortunately, disappointingly, we've heard like safety concerns about Laylit events, people who have felt unsafe at attending these events, which is very strange because, like I said, I think Laylit events gather the most friendly and non-aggressive and beautiful audiences. It's the furthest thing from unsafe. These people who have never been to Laylit events, obviously, and I think that the people who come have the potential to go out into the community the next day and change people's minds and give yourself life so that you can keep resisting in your own way. One more quote from Pauline Oliveros: healing can occur when one's inner experience is made manifest and accepted by others. So artists, I think when you share your truth and your inner experiences and your vulnerability and your bravery, and listeners and audience members, as when we accept that truth and direct that action back into the community, it does have the potential to heal and to change the world, as cliche as it sounds, but I really do think it does. And I want to finish by sharing one little story from the last edition of Laylit. I was going backstage after one of the DJs had just finished, Manalou, who's an Algerian French DJ based in Montreal. And she just finished this amazing, beautiful set that everybody loved and the crowd was going wild. And I went backstage and she was just buzzing with excitement. She was saying how much pride she felt to be able to share her Algerian music and Algerian dance with the crowd and to have people receive it with so much care and show her so much love and dance with her, and how meaningful that was for her. And she said, Ottawa is one of the best crowds I've ever played for. I'd love to come back to Ottawa. Please bring me back. This is the best city ever. So thank you for showing so much care for the artists that we bring and for doing us proud as a community. I hope that you can continue to show your self-care and to bring that care forward into the community. And thank you for showing me the care of listening to me today.
That was incredible.
Thank you.
You gotta take it. Yeah. It's an awkward thing. Thank you so much, Rachel, for showing us what care can look like, what it should look like in a time where care is often needed and often forgotten. I think that's my takeaway today, is how to put more care into the world as well as the events that we organize. So thank you.
I'm open to questions. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. Just wondering a question. So during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of artists share introspective work during that time. How would you share care during those uncertain times, especially when the next time is to tour, etc.?
So when artists are kind of experiencing the pandemic, I guess, and sharing that vulnerability in times like that. I mean, we have been through that, and there was a lot that we couldn't do because mainly what we do is gather people at events. But we did pivot to doing a lot of video programming, and we had to kind of focus our efforts a lot more on just fewer artists, I suppose. But what we've always done, another way that we've kind of approached, I guess, our work is when we want to promote what artists are doing and what their art is, we like to for them to lead the way they talk about their work. And so not us saying like these are all the reasons why this artist matters. And while we do say that, we also like to offer artists opportunities to in their own voice, talk about what is meaningful about their work. So the way we do that is with interviews, sometimes social media takeovers. They curate playlists, which kind of gives an idea of the vibe of what they're offering. Different ways that we say, like, can we give you a bit of money to share something that helps people understand what your artistic statement is or what you're bringing. And I think that kind of helps when the work is really introspective, because it helps artists not have to be put into a box of like, this is how we're communicating and promoting your art. And there's lots of digital and online ways that we could do that. So I guess that's one way we did it. It was a hard time though. There's probably more things that we could have done too. But thank you.
Thank you for the talk. That was super inspiring and really great to hear you speak. I'm just curious, in the next 5-10 years, what's your big dream for Debaser? Do you have any fun, exciting projects that you're working on? What next?
Good question. I mean, something we always say at Debaser is that we don't really want to grow bigger. We don't want to grow in size necessarily. I feel like we're already at a size that is honestly bigger than we ever expected to be. And so we just want to deepen our impact and I think just keep contributing to cultural dialogues in various ways, whatever is happening next. So I don't know if we're definitely not looking at endless growth and expansion as our next goal. But I think something that we dream about is, like I said, curation is really important to what we do. And some of the organizers and events that inspire us a lot are real destination kind of events, wherever they are in the world, to gather people who are adventurous and curious audience members. So I think that's really what we'd like to cultivate, is beyond our community, which I feel like we have a lot of love in the community and we're so grateful and honored about that, is to keep, drawing in people from out of town, connecting with artists internationally and partners internationally, for the benefit of audience members here, so that they can experience more art, so that there's more underrepresented artists who are represented in this community, but also for the benefit of local artists to build bridges in ways that aren't just sort of economic growth, but they're more enriching artistically.
Hi, Rachel.
Hey.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts this morning. In the spirit of the theme, vibrancy and the birthday, so the theme of celebration, I feel like what you shared with us was sharing an example of an organization that's doing it right, or trying your best to do it right, so thanks for that. In the spirit of celebration, I'd love you to name another organization in the community, in Ottawa, that you think is also doing their best to do it right, and why you love partnering with them, or why you would support them.
Great question. I love talking about our friends. Well, I'm really inspired by Creative Mornings being here today. I'm honestly not much of a morning person, so I can't say that I've come to any Creative Mornings before, except for the one when it happened at night. But really appreciate what you guys are doing, and it feels like very DIY and care-oriented, the way that we operate. So I really have a lot of appreciation for being able to convene such a wonderful audience like this. It's very meaningful. There's a lot of organizations who I think are doing it right in this community. Some people that we work with, we work a lot with SAW. We work a lot with people at the Arts Court in general, Digital Arts Resource Center. There's a lot of community, sort of grassroots level organizing that I think is doing a lot of important work. Organizations like Produced by Youth, who do music production and mentorship opportunities for Black youth. Pass the Vibes, who also are mandated to serve Black youth, and they teach DJ. There's so many, I guess. Being Studio, who serves disabled artists, and they do so much amazing programming, and all the artists that they work with are just doing such beautiful work. There's a lot. I could go on and on, but thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.